First of all, I'd really like to welcome you. Welcome, I introduced Denis Bourgeois, who's here. Carole Massé is here. I think you can see her. She is Jean-Yves Soucy's widow. And she was sort of instrumental in making the book come out in French, but she's got something to say after Romeo will have done, and he doesn't have an accent on Romeo, so I'll try and say it like Shakespeare would, Romeo. And after he's done presented why what the origins of the book and his and the readings. I see Peter McCambridge is with us. Peter is the translator of this book, and I think he did a wonderful job. Peter is also fiction editor with QC Fiction, which is our imprint, Quebec Literature in Translation, which we founded in 2016. There's several other people who have promised they're going to be here as well. Rachel Hewitt helped work on the book. Barbara Rudnicki helped work on the book. And I see a friend, Daniel Dufour, who's in here from Charlevoix, quite a few people, and maybe others will join. Why did we publish this book? I have to say it right off. I went and got the book immediately when it came out in French. I had the pleasure of knowing Jean-Yves Soucy vaguely. We'd met about 20 years ago. And once I read it, I said, this book has to come out in English. There were many reasons, but two stand out in my mind. First, on a personal note, when I was growing up in Northwestern Ontario, and I spoke with Romeo about it, Thunder Bay, which is one of the worst places for an Indigenous people. I had experience in summer jobs, among other things, but working with a surveying company, and had several encounters and epiphanies, you could say, like Jean-Yves had. So I really identified with his experience. Just turn that off. I really identified with his experience and his observations. Then in a more recent but previous life, I was working for a big Quebec company, Hydro-Quebec, by which I was able to visit many Cree communities and many other Indigenous communities in Quebec. And at a time when their way of life had been perturbed and shaken up by hydro development and mining activity. And so when I read this book, I said to myself, this would be a very good book for, first of all, for anybody who would have the privilege of going to work with people from First Nations, like I did as a young kid. And then even though we were in a sort of a adversarial situation with Hydro-Quebec, we always had extremely good relations with the people who we met, including Romeo back then. But I also thought it would be an excellent book for young Cree and people from other nations to know this period, to see this period. But it would also be great for other young people across Canada to get to know this. The other reason was my respect for Jean-Yves Soucy, who I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times about 20 years ago. I really respected his writing, and also my respect for Romeo Saganash, whose path I had crossed, and for whom I had tremendous respect for his determination and for what he's accomplished over the years. So that was the main reasons that I saw the book being an important book to publish. The reconciliation is not my favorite word. I would say that justice is better. because it's not up to the Canadian government or to any government to decree that we're going to have reconciliation. It really is up to the Indigenous peoples to decide we want reconciliation because they are the offended party in this story. However, this book and the example of the author, Jean-Yves Soucy, and of the author of the Afterword are very good to help understand what reconciliation might mean, what reconciliation might mean. So even though it's not, in my opinion, the best way to describe what has to be done, reconciliation, I think that the book may be a contribution to such an event in our common lives. Now, who are the people? Jean-Yves Soucy, 1945, was born and passed away in 2017. He was a writer, editor, publisher, journalist, script writer, and mentor based in Montreal. He's the award-winning author of 11 books, novels, historical accounts, biographies. His writings have been translated into English, Spanish, German, Turkish, Romanian, and Armenian. His books in English include Family Secrets, the controversial and shocking story of the Dion quintuplets with Annette and Cécile and Yvonne Dion, and A Summer Without Dawn with Agop J. Hasikian. Romeo Saganash was born in 1961 on the shores of a lake in his parents' tent near Waswanipi in northern Quebec. Cree was the only language he heard and spoke for the first 7 years before he was taken away to residential school. He's the first Cree in Quebec to graduate in law. He served as Deputy Grand Chief of the Grand Council of the Crees and was one of the principal authors of La Paix des Braves, a landmark agreement between the James Bay Cree and the government of Quebec. He was the member of parliament for Abitibi, Bay James and Nunavik EU from 2011 and 2019. So now I invite Romeo to tell us about the origins of this book and perhaps read a couple of excerpts.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Robin, and it's good to see you. I haven't seen you for a while. And thank the other guests that are with us today, including bien évidemment Carole. Très plaisir de vous voir ce soir et surtout d'avoir pensé à moi pour écrire quelque chose à propos de ce livre. J'apprécie beaucoup. Et Denis, évidemment, c'est toujours un plaisir de te voir. Je dois passer par Québec prochainement, alors je te donnerai un coup de fil ou je t'enverrai un email pour qu'on puisse aller prendre un café. So one day, I think I was still Deputy Grand Chief back then, and we had a 3-day meeting at the Sheraton Hotel, which is the second home of the Crees in Montreal. And I had received a call from Jean-Yves, late Jean-Yves Soucy, to meet and discuss. He was a bit fascinated by my path, my career path, and wanted to sit down and discuss the possibility of me writing a book about, and that's what I'm doing right now. But that's another topic that we talk about eventually. But during the course of our discussion, he talked about this summer that he spent in the vicinity of ofwāᔂnipi Post, that we call it. And I was totally taken by the way he described his meeting with the Crees, the society he hadn't learned about in school, and of course meeting Tommy Gull and my late dad William during that summer that served him as guides for the summer, and just the beautiful way that he told me the stories during that 2-3 month adventure in Waswanipi convinced me, because I knew him by then. I knew who Jean-Yves Soucy was, and how beautifully he writes. And I told Jean-Yves, you have to tell that story. And we didn't see each other afterwards following that meeting. But when I heard about this book coming out, so beautifully written, and the way, and the way I guess he tells the story, it's just amazing, and I'm thankful for him. It's too bad that I couldn't thank him in his lifetime. He passed away, as mentioned, in 2017. But his memory lives on with this beautiful book, and I'm grateful that I was asked to write the afterword. So I just want to. There's a lot of passages in this book that are so beautiful and touching. So I chose a couple. I think that won't be relevant, I think, for Crees and the Québécois today as we speak, because these are relevant issues that people had even talked about back then. I use our break to ask William a little more about the spirits. Do they have names? Do they also live inside people? He consults Tommy, who replies at length with a rapid, monotonous delivery. There are Wabinsu, spirit of the east, Shawensu, spirit of the south, Juedensu, spirit of the north wind, and more. Each of us has a spirit inside us, Mistabel. I hesitate before asking William if he also believes in the great man. Once again, he answers the way a Jesuit might. Mistabel, or the soul. Maybe the same thing? I get the impression the conversation is making him uncomfortable, and he goes straight into telling me how he used to lead the canoe brigades from the Hudson's Bay Company. In June, up to 15 or so canoes, each carrying 2 men, would leave Waswanipi, laden down with furs purchased by the trading post since the previous fall. Their route first took them to Gull Lake, then on to Olga and Matagami Lakes. From there, they would follow the Nottoway River down to James Bay, hugging the shoreline until they reached Fort Rupert. Close to 300 miles in all. From Fort Rupert, the pelts would be sent on to England by boat. And on the way back, the canoes would carry goods to be traded the following winter. William would usually make 2 or 3 trips during the warm weather before heading to his hunting ground with his family. But those days were gone. Heavy goods are now delivered to Waswanipi from Sanitaire over the winter, while perishables arrive regularly by floatplane. This first excursion is just like the 2 months to come, a carefree existence among a welcomingly, steadfastly optimistic people who have contagious thirst for life. I feel accepted in the village, where everyone knows me and says hello. Even the countless dogs only sniff at my coattails, never more than when I'm bringing fish to Jean and her companion. I thought I was coming to a new world, but now I gradually realize that it's a different civilization I'm being confronted with, as different from my own as Chinese civilization would be. It's different how they conceive of the world, of time, and of the place given to humankind in the universe.
Very nice.
Johnny, aren't you going to ask what I think of it, says William. a little irony in his voice. Please tell me. The world has already changed and is changing faster and faster. It's William's turn to launch into a long monologue, but he seems less despairing than Tommy. There's no turning back, he says. It's too late. The Crees can no longer live as they did before. There are more of them now, and their habitat has been divided up by logging camps, mines, and towns for the workers to live in. All of which disturbs the animals, and the roads bring in white hunters. There's no longer enough space, no longer enough animals to live in the forest as before. And with the price of fur constantly falling, there's no longer any money in trapping. Things are getting worse. The white man's world is growing, impinging on the indigenous people's world. Lastly, school is perhaps a necessary evil. The need to know the white man, the white world, acquire their knowledge to be able to stand up to them, know how to negotiate with them, not try to become white themselves, but learn a new way to live as Crees. I saw William, my father, excuse me. I saw William, my father, for the final time, unrecognizable, in his hospital bed in La Belle Socavio. I was 7 years old. I remember because while I realized he would soon be leaving us, I was also about to leave myself, in my case, for residential school. I know that he knew just by the way he looked at me that day. A look of such absolute sadness that upset me so much. What was he thinking? What was he thinking? What was he thinking? It's a question that haunts me to this day. Perhaps he wanted to tell me something one last time. But what is it? What was that? Today, I'm the same age as he was when he left us. I didn't know why at the time. I was obsessed with his craftsman's hands, sculpted by time and effort, laced with veins. Spring, summer, fall, or winter, I admired him like a child awaiting his turn to be like his father. Like him, building canoes. Like him, patiently crafting perfect snowshoes that I still consider to be works of art. Like him, carving his paddles and all the other tools he needed to live the traditional Cree way of life. He loved and had a deep knowledge of his boreal forest, especially his Broadback River Valley. Back then, I was a child, and every young Cree dreamed of living the traditional Cree way of life, of pursuing the age-old traditions, of absorbing all of the knowledge handed down from generation to generation about the environment, about time, about why we have 6 seasons, about the animals, about the animal world, about the plants and fruits that heal so many of our passing ailments. In short, about the reason we call her Mother Earth. I began recounting the last time I saw my father on his deathbed. Several of my sisters and brothers were there. William was barely recognizable. His cancer had spread, and he could no longer speak or move. The right side of his body was paralyzed. One moment from our visit will stay with me for the rest of my life. A look of sheer panic, I remembered very well, suddenly came over my father. He tried to tell us something, but the words never left his mouth. Seconds later, the sheets that covered his now frail body turned yellow with urine. I ran out of the room, fell to my knees in the hallway, in tears, devastated to see the man who had always stood so tall in my child's eyes, the greatest hunter of all time, so helpless. That was the last time I saw William. Thank you.
Very nice.
Bravo.
Bravo, c'est vraiment bien.
Bravo, bravo, bravo.
C'est beau.
Très,
So anyway, it was to appreciate, I mean, your reading, we can appreciate the man, but after reading about him in Jean-Yves' eyes, and then hearing that, we can just feel what it meant for you. That, you know, it must have been 69 or something, 1969, I guess. Yeah. And now we have we're very happy that Carole Massé has joined us. Carole Massé is Jean-Yves Soucy's widow, and she's prepared a beautiful text and she's going to read it to us in French, and then we will. And by the way, we've translated it, and I think Blossom's going to put it in the chat area. And so you can read it if you don't understand the French. And then we'll open up to discussion and questions. So, Carole?
Oui. Bonsoir. Je veux tout de suite remercier Romeo Saganash de sa présentation du livre de Waswanipi et surtout de sa lecture des extraits de Jean-Yves Soucy. Mais je veux aussi le remercier de sa très belle et très émouvante postface et des extraits qu'il vient de nous lire. Ça m'a vraiment beaucoup, beaucoup touchée. Je vais continuer mes remerciements. C'est un peu inévitable. Bon, je vais d'abord remercier M. Jean Bernier des éditions Boréal d'avoir publié la version originale de Waswanipi. Et je veux aussi remercier M. Robin Philpott d'avoir publié la traduction anglaise de l'œuvre dans sa maison d'édition Baraka Books. Jean-Yves m'a souvent dit que son expérience de garde-feu en 1963, à l'âge de 18 ans, l'avait profondément marqué à cause des découvertes qu'il avait faites cet été-là. Or, il raconte lui-même ses découvertes dans Waswanipi. Sa première découverte est celle non seulement d'un monde nouveau, celui des Crees, mais d'une civilisation différente de la sienne et qu'il aime d'emblée. Les mots que l'écrivain utilise pour narrer sa rencontre avec ses deux guides Crees, William Saganash et Tommy Goll, sont sans équivoque. Joie, rire partagé, connivence. Un mot qu'il répète souvent, connivence. Jean-Yves est curieux, respectueux, et il veut tout apprendre. Il leur pose de nombreuses questions, entre autres sur leur conception du temps, du monde, de la place de l'homme dans l'univers, de même que sur la langue Cree. William et Tommy lui donnent des réponses inattendues, originales, qu'ils font réfléchir et penser d'une manière nouvelle. Visitant régulièrement le village Cree, s'imprégnant de la culture Cree, Jean-Yves se sent comme chez lui, écrit-il, comme en famille. Il perçoit sa propre personne et les Crees comme égaux, comme parents. Sa première découverte est donc celle d'un peuple différent du sien et pourtant proche de lui, et pour lequel il ressent une profonde amitié. Sa deuxième découverte a lieu vers la fin de l'été, à l'occasion d'une noce. C'est Jean-Yves et son collègue de travail qui vont acheter de la bière pour la fête parce que la loi interdit aux Indiens d'acheter de l'alcool. Après la noce, il voit les hommes du village ramasser des bouteilles et des capsules au sol et les immerger ensuite dans le lac. Ils agissent ainsi, en fait, pour ne pas être pris en faute par des agents de la GRC. À propos de cette scène, Jean-Yves écrit « Cela me fait mal, y voyant la marque d'une profonde injustice. » À ce moment-là, il prend vraiment conscience que les Crees, comme les autres peuples premiers, sont des citoyens de seconde zone, écrit-il. Et son cri de révolte devant ce fait, il le traduit par des dénonciations des mauvais traitements que les Blancs leur infligent. Découvrir un autre peuple, le respecter et l'aimer, puis découvrir la flagrante injustice dont ce même peuple est l'objet, sont ce qui a marqué Jean-Yves adolescent. Un Jean-Yves pour qui la justice sociale et l'égalité entre tous les êtres humains seront ses préoccupations majeures dans sa vie d'adulte. Et malgré le fait que le monde changeait pour les Autochtones et que ces changements apporteraient des bouleversements à leur mode de vie, Jean-Yves, a toujours gardé espoir qu'il les surmonterait et atteindrait un jour à cette justice et à cette égalité. En 2013, en vacances à Baie-Trinité, Jean-Yves croise par hasard une famille Innu, 2 parents avec 4 enfants, et il s'entretient avec elle. Lorsqu'ils se séparent, il a ces mots sereins et confiants qui terminent son récit. Sous mes yeux, dit-il, je vois qu'ils réussissent à se réinventer, à se créer de nouveaux repères dans un monde qui a complètement changé pour eux. Et ils le font sans renier ce qu'ils sont, une facette unique de la diversité humaine. Merci.
So, if people have questions, I invite you to write them in the chat box on your right, or comments right in the chat box, and then Blossom will direct the traffic. But anybody who wants to say something about the book or about the subject is very welcome to ask questions and to make comments. I have a first question. Ask it to Romeo. What do you think? How would William see the situation today in Waswanipi and in the other communities? I mean, I'd be very curious to know how you think he might react to it.
Well, I wrote a chapter recently in a book entitled We Tomorrow. And I talk about how I see my children's future in 50 years from now, which is something what my late dad did and talked about with Jean-Yves in Waswanipi. And I think, I don't know, it's the spirits and ancestors that come together, make these things happen. And I think the way he talked about the future in Waswanipi for the Cree and for the other communities he was absolutely dead on, right, about how he predicted these things would come about. But he was also right about how, and Carole just talked about that as well, how we're always capable of reinventing ourselves in the face of these important challenges that we have today as distinct peoples, as distinct nations. I think it was it's one Latin American, Octavio Paz, who talked about modernity, and which essentially means, in his view, adopting, adapting, and reinventing ourselves. Octavio Paz was right, and I guess in those days, our own Octavio Paz was William Saganash. So that being said, I think, and that's what I talk about in that book, We Tomorrow, that's coming out next month. I talk about that, and I talk about how it's unfortunate that the legacy I'm leaving behind for my children and grandkids is the same one that I inherited when I started out in politics in 1981. My first job was with the late Grand Chief Billy Diamond in 1981. I was still in high school, and Billy asked if I could work with him that summer, and I did. And I did again the following summer. And one of the things that I will always remember about Billy and what he told me and what he taught me was that he told me one day, you know what, Romeo? I negotiated the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, the first modern treaty in Canada, signed between the Cree and Inuit on one part, and the governments of Quebec and Canada and Hydro-Quebec on the other part. First treaty in this country signed by a province as well. Never before that province was a signatory to a treaty. But this is what he said. That is the floor that I laid for the future generation, including yourself as a young man. And it's really up to you to take it from there. And I think I like to think that I did the same for the next generation with La Paix des Braves, with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, adopted in 2007, 14 years ago by the UN General Assembly. That international human rights instrument took 23 years to negotiate. It is the longest discussed and negotiated international human rights instrument in the history of the United Nations, that declaration. And so that's the floor I like to think that I laid for the future generation. And it's really up to them from here on to take it from there.
I noticed André Bennett is joined. André is a constitutional lawyer, but he's also defended several First Nations in Quebec. So he's, although we don't see him, but he's joined us. So. Are there any questions?
Bonjour, bonjour Romeo.
Je ne vois pas qui parle.
Juste un instant, je vais mettre ma caméra, c'était pas prévu. Juste un instant. Est-ce que vous pouvez me voir maintenant? Oui, bon.
Yeah.
Bonjour Romeo.
Je ne te vois pas, mais tu peux...
Ah bon, moi je me vois. Mais...
OK.
Okay. Roméo, en t'écoutant, je me disais, la prochaine fois que je vais te voir, je vais te faire une confidence. Alors, je vais te la faire ici. Puis en même temps, je vais partager un petit secret d'État provincial. J'ai été consulté par le gouvernement du Québec lorsque j'étais avocat. On m'envoyait des demandes d'avis juridiques sur des sujets délicats. Je travaillais à la maison. Et puis, on m'a envoyé en 2001 la poursuite des Crees, la poursuite déposée par James O'Reilly, qui portait sur, évidemment, la violation de la Convention de la baie James. On m'a demandé ce que j'en pensais. J'ai répondu, et là, je viole un peu un secret, mais je pense qu'il faut le dire. J'ai répondu que James O'Reilly avait raison. Et pour cela, j'ai fait une lecture, une analyse de la Convention de la baie James. Et je suis arrivé à la conclusion que malgré le fait que la Convention avait été rédigée, il faut le dire, là, un peu sous la contrainte, un peu rapidement, et que dans sa version originale, elle n'était pas toujours claire, que fondamentalement, l'interprétation qu'en faisait l'écrit était correcte. Et que donc le gouvernement du Québec se dirigeait vers une défaite majeure devant les tribunaux. Ce que j'ai su par la suite, et là encore je révèle un secret, mais je crois qu'il faut le faire au moins une fois, c'est que le gouvernement, en voyant cela, voyant mon avis juridique, a consulté un ancien président d'Hydro-Québec qui avait négocié avec Billy Diamond, surtout les clauses portant le chapitre sur les droits forestiers, sur l'industrie de l'exploitation forestière dans le territoire de la Convention, dans le territoire Crees. Et cet ancien président, dont j'oublie le nom, aurait confirmé mon interprétation, malgré, je dirais, le manque de clarté de la Convention. Alors, il me confirmait que c'était bien l'intention derrière les rédacteurs. Et j'ai su par la suite que c'est cet avis juridique et cette confirmation par l'ancien président qui a convaincu Bernard Landry de négocier avec les Crees sérieusement. Donc, je veux dire qu'il y avait donc différentes lectures à l'intérieur du gouvernement du Québec de la Convention de la baie James, mais que c'est finalement la bonne qui a prévalu. Et je suis très, très heureux, Roméo, très, très fier d'avoir contribué au rapprochement de nos deux nations, ne serait-ce que modestement. Et je te remercie de l'occasion d'avoir dit cela. Merci, Robert.
Any other questions? I have a question for the translator, Peter McCambridge, but I'm putting him on the spot. Peter, I was wondering if when you're translating...
Before you say your question, my microphone's working okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. I just like translating a book like this. You know, when there's a lot of issues that you may be concerned about choosing the right words. How was it a challenge? And perhaps you could say something about it.
What I would say is when I translate something, I like to focus on the writing. So for me, I tried to make it sound as nice as it was in the French. And that's what my focus was on throughout. And you and Baraka, you take care of the non-fiction side of things. I take care of the words. And that was my approach throughout, just to try and make it sound just as beautiful as it was in the French.
Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway.
While my microphone's on, I have a question for Romeo. I'm just wondering if you have any other books, fiction or non-fiction, that you think we should be reading to find out more about the next 50 years?
Well, one of the books I read recently, I don't know if I have it here, by a professor at McGill University, Payam Akavan. He wrote this book entitled In Search of a Better World, which in my view is one of the best human rights books that I have read to date. That book deserves to be translated into French. So it's called In Search of a Better World by Amakavan. I believe he's at the University of Toronto now, but he was until recently at the University of McGill University. There are a lot of books that I would like to see in French. There are a lot of French books that need to be translated into English. That I confess I read a lot, and vice versa. And if I sat on a board of directors of a translation company, I would be able to recommend a lot of books in English that need to be translated to French, and French books that need to be translated into English. There are a lot, but I take this opportunity to thank you for the translation of the Afterword. And it's not an easy text to translate as beautifully as you did. So thank you for that. I have a very particular style in French when I write in French. And so I just wanted to thank you for that effort.
Yeah, thank you. It's a shame. It's nice to be talking to you tonight, but it's a shame we're not in the same room. It's different. I'd like to meet you properly someday.
Mhm. Well, that'll be next year. We'll have in-person launches.
Yeah.
And maybe Romeo will launch his book in Montreal.
Well, as I said, I'm working on 3 projects right now, including one on my political experience, not just with the Parliament of Canada, which lasted almost a decade, 8.5 years, but all the previous political experience that I've had as an individual. So I'm writing it both in French and English at the same time. So this is how it happens with Romeo Saganash. When I get up in the morning, so it really depends on what I read and what the first words that I utter when I get up. If it's in English, I write in English that day. If it's in French, I write in French that day. So I'm basically doing a simultaneous translation of that political experience that I've gone through. I think it's important, and we see that today with the number of Indigenous candidates in this election next Monday, 77 of them. I think it has an impact on the use of this platform called the House of Commons or Parliament of Canada. For a long time, the Cree and other Indigenous people did not necessarily participate in elections. And there are historical reasons for that. One of them being that we got the right to vote much longer after the women got a right to vote in this country. We got a right to vote in 1960 in federal elections, in 1969 in provincial elections, or at least in Quebec. So there's a reason why they don't feel obligated to participate in a way as well. The other reason being, well, they feel that if they become participants of the colonial institution, which has been so bad to them. Don't forget, Parliament of Canada is where the Indian Act was written and adopted, and contained those provisions about our parents being obliged to send us to residential school. So that is another reason why there hasn't been much participation. And thirdly, because a lot of Indigenous people still feel that if they participate in the white man's institutions like the Parliament of Canada, while they sort of lose who they are and their status and their rights. And that's the reason, that's one of the main reasons why in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we negotiated Article 5. Article 5 of the UN Declaration essentially says that that any Indigenous individual has the right to participate in the state's economic, social, cultural, and political life of the state without losing their status or their rights. So that's basically what I did for 8.5 years. Still, there are Indigenous nations that refuse to participate in the system, and I respect that. I honor that difference. So everybody in the circle has a part to play, and they play their part. I play my part. So as far as I know, coming out from that experience after 8.5 years, and after having considered exactly 1,463 pieces of legislation as a member of parliament, I can safely say today that I'm still Cree.
Roméo, vous m'entendez, ça va?
Oui.
Tu as dit tout à l'heure que la Convention de James avait été signée par la province, par le Québec, par la province, je n'aime pas dire la province, mais en tout cas par le Québec, que c'était la seule province qui avait signé un traité avec les Indiens. Ça veut dire que tous les fameux traités à numéro là, qui ont été signés au 19e siècle, au début 20e siècle, les provinces, c'est le fédéral seulement qui négociait, négociait, c'est pas un bon mot d'après moi, là, qui abordait les Indiens, qui discutait avec les Indiens, qui imposait finalement un traité, mais les provinces ne participaient jamais à ces traités-là.
C'est ce que j'en comprends. Tous les traités numérotés n'ont pas de signataire provincial. Et donc, par conséquent, c'est pour ça que je dis que le Québec est la première province à avoir signé un traité qui était la Convention de la baie James. Et tu comprendras facilement pourquoi, Denis, le Québec tenait mordicus à cette époque-là à poursuivre et à garder sa juridiction au niveau santé, services sociaux et éducation. Donc, les Crees, les Inuits et les Naskapi sont les seules nations autochtones au pays qui reçoivent le financement pour leur système de santé et système scolaire par la province. Parce que Québec voulait garder cette juridiction et cette compétence. Ça ne veut pas dire non plus que les provinces n'étaient pas impliquées dans les négociations des traités numérotés. On se souviendra que la Constitution de 1867 donne la compétence des Indiens et les terres réservées aux Indiens au fédéral. Je n'ai pas vu jusqu'à maintenant aucune cause qui définit ce que veut dire l'expression « terre réservée aux Indiens ». Est-ce que c'est uniquement les réserves? À mon avis, non.
Oh.
Et donc, ça a des conséquences juridiques très importantes lorsque la Cour suprême déterminera ce que veut dire cette expression-là. Parce que ça implique, entre autres, est-ce que, par exemple, tout le territoire conventionné au Québec est un territoire réservé aux Indiens, puisque nos droits constitutionnels qui sont reconnus dans la Convention de la baie James s'appliquent à travers tout le territoire de la Convention de la baie James. Alors, ça a des conséquences également en droit environnemental. Pendant longtemps, devant les tribunaux, par exemple, Hydro-Québec a toujours plaidé qu'un projet hydroélectrique est un projet provincial. Donc, les processus d'évaluation et d'examen environnementaux fédéraux ne devraient pas s'appliquer au projet hydroélectrique au Québec. Ce qui est faux à mon avis, je ne suis pas entièrement en désaccord avec cette interprétation. Et on n'a pas eu encore l'occasion devant les tribunaux d'argumenter ce genre de points juridiques. Mais j'espère qu'un jour, on va avoir ça. Donc, par conséquent, est-ce qu'un un territoire où s'applique le traité numéro 1, je suis sur le territoire du traité numéro 1 ici, est-ce que ça pourrait être considéré comme terre réservée aux Indiens? Donc, c'est des grandes questions juridiques qu'on n'a pas encore eu l'opportunité ou l'occasion d'amener devant les tribunaux.
Il y aurait beaucoup à dire sur les fameux traités à numéros. Moi, j'ai été très marqué par un livre de Fumolo, tu dois avoir connu Fumolo, qui travaille avec les Dénés. Écoute, son livre, c'est absolument fantastique. Et on voit que ce n'est pas une négociation. Quand du côté des Dénés, il y a des métis, en fait, qui sont dans la communauté et qui veulent négocier pour la communauté. Le fédéral les refuse. Il ne veut pas négocier avec eux. En fait, il ne veut pas négocier. Encore une fois, j'écarte le mot négocier parce que je ne vois pas ça comme des négociations. C'est comme des clauses qui sont imposées. Et quand il y a quelqu'un en face qui est capable de tenir tête aux agents fédéraux, on les discarte en disant « Vous n'êtes pas des vrais Dénés ».
On pourrait ajouter que la gouvernement du Canada a signé 6 traités en 6 ans après 1870, après la première guerre avec Riel. Les provinces n'existaient pas où c'était les territoires du Nord-Ouest à l'époque. Et puis, il disait, on va signer ça, que les chefs signent ou non, on va de l'avant. Donc, c'était un fait accompli, chacun de ces traités-là.
Moi, j'ai une question très différente et très personnelle. Une question de curiosité. Moi, j'ai toujours aimé ton nom, Saganash. Je trouve que c'est un très beau nom. D'abord, il est facile à retenir, il est sonore, mais en même temps, là, Roméo, à quel moment dans l'histoire apparaît le nom Saganash? Est-ce que tu as une idée des parents, des grands-parents, des arrière-grands-parents?
En fait, ça vient à mon avis, d'après ce que j'ai lu, ça vient des Potawatomi. Il y avait ce monsieur élevé par des jésuites, donc qui parlait français, anglais, plusieurs langues autochtones. Il a servi de diplomate durant les négociations pour plusieurs traités dans la région au sud des Grands Lacs, dont les Potawatomi. Son nom était William Caldwell. William Caldwell, les Potawatomi l'appelaient Saganash, donc l'homme blanc ou l'anglais.
Ah oui?
Oui. Donc,
oui. On va tout savoir. On va tout savoir.
Donc, et lorsqu'on suit ces langues qui sont proches du Potawatomi, par exemple, chez les Ojibwe, Saganash veut dire l'homme blanc. Dans d'autres nations autochtones, ça veut dire l'anglais.
Ah oui?
Et d'où cette rigolade qu'on a toujours, moi et Dominique Leblanc, qui est ministre dans le gouvernement fédéral. Dominique, je l'appelle Dominique Saganash, et lui m'appelle Romeo Leblanc, comme son père. Donc, ma compréhension, c'est ça. Il n'y a pas de mot ancré dans ma langue qui est proche de Saganash. Alors, ça vient de d'autres nations, et notamment des Potawatomi. Cette partie-là est claire. Les Potawatomi appelaient William Caldwell Saganash, qui veut dire l'anglais.
Merci.
I see that Andre Farkas and Carolyn have a question.
They'd like it to be read to Romeo, so I'm going to read it on their behalf. Will having an Inuk Governor General have any effect on consciousness raising in Canada, in your opinion?
The Governor General, in his general role, I think can be very effective in educating Canadians on many issues, whether it's the climate emergency, whether it's reconciliation, Indigenous peoples, and so on. So yeah, she definitely has a role to play. And I've known Mary Simon for many years. I've worked with Mary Simon at the United Nations in the negotiations and drafting of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. He's a longtime diplomat, and that's what it takes to be in that position. I'm saddened that I wasn't chosen. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I would have said no. But I've had enough of this for 40 years now. But I think she has a certain role to play. And I think she can use this incredible platform and an incredible opportunity, historic opportunity, to work on her priorities as the Governor General. And she'll have the resources, all the resources to do so. And I wish her all the best in her in this role for the next couple of years. I'm happy for her, in fact.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
Maybe I have one, Robin.
Sorry?
Well, I have one
Okay.
question. Yeah, it's Daniel Dufault speaking from La Malbaie, Quebec. What I heard tonight is very interesting. Thank you very much. I was just wondering, how do you see, because I read the book is very interesting. And how do you see the future, the relation between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal, for example, let's say in Quebec to start with, because this is the book. The book is the meeting between two words in a way. And how do you see it today and going forward?
I talk about it a little bit in the book. When I came out of residential school, I set out to do two things, essentially. Go back in the bush, which I did after residential school, and then to reconcile with the people that put me away for 10 years. And I tried to do that in many different ways, in particular in Quebec.
Yes.
And La Paix des Braves is a perfect example of that. When in December of 2000, the Superior Court of Quebec came down with the decision. We had a court case in the Quebec Superior Court against 27 forestry companies. And we basically argued that we cannot exercise our constitutional rights to hunt, fish, and trap if the forest is clear cut. That was the main legal argument that we presented to the Quebec Superior Court. And Juge Rouleau, who was the judge in that case, came down with a decision in December of 2000 and said, and I'm quoting him by heart here, he said, the provisions of the Quebec Forestry Act are incompatible with the terms of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. So he basically agreed with us. That decision put at stake some 18,000 jobs in the Northern Quebec region, north of Abitibi. 18,000 jobs were directly related to forestry. And Bernard Landry was the premier at the time. I spoke with him, I believe the next day. Everybody was gone by December 20th, back home, back in the bush for the Christmas holidays. And I was the only one left in the offices, I believe. And I spoke to Bernard. And I told him, I said, okay, we'll sit down and negotiate. I know what's at stake here. There are many jobs. An entire industry is at stake here with that decision. So let's sit down and negotiate something about forestry. We need a distinct forestry regime in northern Quebec because of those Cree rights under that James Bay and Northern Quebec agreement. But I said, let's also do this. Let's sit down and settle our relations, because relations between nations and peoples should always be the number one item in our discussions, our relations. And I said, we've been fighting in courts. We've been fighting each other in public for the last 25 years because you didn't keep your end of the deal in the James Bay Agreement. So let's settle our relations as well. And the title, the real title of that agreement that we signed in February 2002 is Agreement for a New Relationship between the Cree Nation and the government of Quebec. That's the real title. Everybody calls it La Paix des Braves, but the real title is about our relations as nations, distinct nations and peoples. And I can tell you the anecdote that comes, and it's a beautiful one. No, not everybody knows this anecdote. When we signed in October of 2001, the agreement in principle that led to La Paix des Braves, there was a major announcement made in Le Salon Rouge at the National Assembly. There are very few events at the Salon Rouge in the National Assembly. We had our ceremony there in October 2001. And Ted Moses, who was our Grand Chief, was sitting next to me in the Salon Rouge, and he was supposed to speak right after Bernard Landry. And just a couple of minutes before he got up to the podium, he turned to me. Ted doesn't speak French. So he turned to me and said, Romeo, I should at least say one phrase in French in this place. So I took his speech that we had prepared for him and found a place where I put down, aujourd'hui, nous enterrons le hache de guerre, nous faisons la paix des braves.
Wow.
That was,
c'est beau.
C'est très beau. Très, très beau.
il y a très peu de gens qui connaissent cette
Ben
anecdote.
oui,
Je
la connaissais pas du tout.
Je vous l'offre aujourd'hui.
C'est très beau.
C'est merveilleux.
Est-ce que c'est là qu'on a utilisé le terme la paix des braves la première fois pour cette entente? Ah oui. It's got a great history. La paix des braves has got a wonderful history. I mean, de Gaulle used it with Algeria. There's many cases where, you know, so it's very, very digne. You know?
Yeah, and it's also called being at the right place at the right moment.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, I happened to sit next to him. Well, I was his main advisor, but I was sitting next to him. So, and he knew I spoke French, so he just asked me. He knew how I would come up with something, and that's how it happened.
Great.
Merci. Merci.
If there aren't any other questions, I have one little question for closing remark, and I would ask Romeo to have some closing remarks, and then I'll come back. But I was just wondering, how is the Cree language in the James Bay area? Is it? I mean, that was an important part of Jean-Yves' story. Est-ce que la langue se comporte bien?
Moi, j'estime que oui. I think it's doing well. I think one of the main reasons why this is so is because we managed to institutionalize Cree culture and Cree language in the Cree way of life as well, in the different institutions that were established after the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement. For instance, I'll give you just that example, but there are many. The Cree meetings right now, held by the Cree Nation government, are live streamed. So anytime you have follow the Cree Nation government on Twitter, they always put up the link to listen in, and it always happens in Cree all the time. And the other example I want to give is the fact that we institutionalized many of these many parts of our culture and languages. The Cree School Board is a perfect example. The Cree School Board has a different academic calendar as the rest of Quebec, because they take into consideration our traditional spring goose break. So the schools are closed in the springtime for a week or two, depending on the community, so that all children can go on the land with their parents and grandparents and families and live the traditional way of life during that traditional goose break. Same thing for the moose break in the fall. So our kids start earlier than other kids in Quebec and finish later than other kids in Quebec. And that's how it should be done for Indigenous people. And the fact that more than 90% of Crees are still speakers of the language is an important element in that discussion as well. As a member of parliament, I travel throughout this country, and sadly I saw many communities where there's only one or two Indigenous language speakers left in a given community. So it's sad to see. So we need to invest in revitalizing Indigenous languages in this country. There are many that are still spoken, more than 50 in this country, and that's one of the reasons why, there's a lot of things I'm proud of in my time as a member of parliament. And one of them was to be able to change the rules of the Parliament of Canada with respect to Indigenous languages. When I got elected in 2011, and my first day in the House of Commons, I laid my things on my table in the House of Commons, walked directly to the table of the clerk. The clerk of the House of Commons is essentially the boss of the place in terms of rules and procedures. So I went up to her and I said, Audrey, can I ask my questions in Cree? Can I do my speeches in Cree? To which she smiled and said, Romeo, as a jurist, you know well that the two official languages in this place is French and English. So this was 2011. She knows I never accepted that answer, and I pursued that endeavor to have Indigenous languages spoken in the House of Commons. So by 2018, one of the main committees, the PROC House Affairs and Procedures Committee, was mandated to study the issue and the question. I was the first witness. So I brought with me as a witness all of the legal arguments that would determine that I have that right. There's a fundamental right to understand and to be understood. It's a fundamental right. And when I had that answer in 2011, I said, how is it possible that in a place like this, a language that has been spoken for at least 7,000 years, in our case, cannot be spoken in the House of Commons? So I arrived there with international human rights instruments. I arrived there with constitutional arguments, not just Section 35, but Section 25, 21, the 1982 Constitution, treaty rights with respect to languages, and the House Affairs and Procedures Committee finally accepted, yes, it is possible. We can do this. It turns out that I find out during those hearings of that committee that the interpretation services of the House of Commons has a bank of over 200 Indigenous interpreters in more than 25 languages, Indigenous languages. So they're there. All you have to do is provide a 48-hour notice that you'll be doing your speech, your 20-minute speech or your 10-minute speech in Cree in 48 hours. And that's what I did. And it was beautiful because the day I did my speech in Cree, my interpreter was from Ojibwagamot in northern Quebec, one of the Cree communities who studies in Ottawa. Just by accident and coincidence, was sitting, I don't know if you ever noticed the windows behind us in the House of Commons where the interpreters sit. So during the shot of my speech, we saw her interpreting my words from Cree to English in the background. That was just beautiful. So glad that happened. So yeah, it's important that we continue to do those kind of things, and that's what I've been trying to do. Like I said bad words in the House of Commons, I admit, but that is my proudest moment.
Great. Language. So if there are no more questions, I have some thanks to address. I'd like to thank Romeo for coming and participating in this and writing for the Afterword, and his general support of this project, that I hope the book will be able to be used among the Cree, even though it's not in Cree yet. But I'd like to thank Carole Massé for coming and writing such a wonderful text about her book. We're going to put it on our website. It's also here in English. We'll put it in French and English on Baraka Books' website. I want to thank Jan Jorgensen, who is graciously put us on her Zoom account and allows us to hold these weekly launches. We have 3 more coming up, and each Wednesday evening at 6:45, some very interesting books, just like this one and the one we launched last week. And Blossom Tom, who coordinates this, who sort of set up and organized them, these events, and done it very professionally. And then all the other people who attended, Peter McCambridge, I think he had to leave, or I'm not sure, he for the translation, and for the questions, and those who helped participate with the book, Rachel Hewitt, Barbara Rudnicki, and anybody else I've forgotten. It's really been a pleasure to work to produce this book and to launch it tonight. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
And I think we should thank you also, Robin, for all the work you've done.
Yes.
Avec des livres comme ça, c'était vraiment un plaisir. Hein. Des bons
J'en
livres.
doute pas.
You know.
Mais en tout cas, c'est un beau travail, puis c'était une belle soirée. Merci à tout le monde.
Merci, Robin, infiniment.
Okay.
Et merci à Roméo aussi.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.